Back in college, my friends and I got into the habit of exploring abandoned buildings. We've seen some incredible places and we have gotten some pretty cool souvenirs. I don't really condone taking stuff from some buildings, but if it's about to be torn down and contractors have taken out everything they deem to be worth something, then I'll gladly take that depression glass they left behind. It's a small group of friends that goes exploring with me, and I love introducing new people to it. A friend of mine had asked me on several occasions if I could take him somewhere, because he never went exploring before. I decided to take him to an old paper factory that didn't have much inside, but had an absolutely beautiful view of the city from the roof. Also, it was incredibly easy to get in and out of. We went with a few other people, but two of my friends had decided to wait outside for us since they had been in the building a few too many times to find it interesting anymore. As we went to climb inside, a drunk couple came out. Not unusual. A lot of people use the building to smoke, drink, or paint in, and we asked if there were many people inside. They said they thought it was mostly empty, but they heard someone banging around a few floors up that startled them out. They said he sounded angry and maybe we should avoid the roof. Since we weren't there to drink or anything, the roof was our only goal. We decided we'll take our chances and head up. After all, it is a massive building and we didn't think we would run into the guy. We walk up about 10 flights of stairs and then climb the ladder to the roof. My friend is impressed and the view is awesome. As we were about to head back down, my friend waiting on the street calls us. He says that a man has passed out in the street, and the two of them pulled him out of the way of traffic and called an ambulance for him. They suggest that we wait out on the roof to avoid exiting the building while the cops are there. Neither of us can afford the $5,000 fine or 2-week jail time just for looking at the city from an abandoned building. We wait, but we probably shouldn't have waited on the roof. We get the all clear from my friend to come back down and we head to the ladder. My friend goes first, and then our flashlight dies. The ladder is tricky to get onto when you can't see it, and it's missing some rungs, so I come down very slowly in the dark, afraid of hurting myself. I hop down, and my friend tells me very quietly that he hears someone in the room next to us. I shrug it off. We already know people are in the building. Then the screaming starts. At first, it almost sounds like one of my friends who waited outside, yelling my name. I hesitate at the top of the stairs, just outside the door of the room screaming is coming from, trying to decide if it is him or if he's playing some sort of prank. The guy I came into the building with grabs my wrists and we start running down the stairs. At this point, it's obvious it's not my friend and it's just guttural, intense screaming. We start running down the stairs and then we hear a really loud banging to go with the screaming. It sounds like this guy has a heavy object that he is swinging at the walls and exposed pipes with. There is only one flight of stairs because every other way down is out of order freight elevators. So we are trapped in this stairwell, and it's about 10 flights till we reach the ground floor, and have to book it to the opposite side of this factory and back out of the hole we climbed through. Besides screaming and swinging that heavy object, we heard him barreling down the stairs behind us, but he is at least one floor behind. Whatever he is using to hit the walls and pipes with is clearly enough to do some damage to our skulls because a bit of brick chipped off the wall follows us down the steps, and that's when my friend grabs my wrist again and throws me through the nearest door. We've only made it down 3 floors, and at the beginning of each flight of stairs, there is one door that opens onto the entire level. In other words, it is painfully obvious where we've gone. After flying into this room, we notice it has been gutted like every other floor, but more of the windows are boarded up and it's very dark. All that's in the room to hide behind are some pillars. We get behind one and huddle together. This guy stops outside the doorway to the room we are in, and he is still screaming. It's terrifying. Then he starts swinging his weapon around and slamming it into the door frame. We're sure that he is going to come in, and the only way out is the door he is currently standing in. Neither of us ever look around the pillar to see the guy, and we have no idea what his weapon is. Nearly 4 minutes pass and he hasn't stopped screaming. For whatever reason, he doesn't come into the room we are in, but starts running down the stairs. We can hear him hitting pipes and smacking the walls, and we just wait. We have 7 floors to go down, and we could pass him in any doorway on the way down. Eventually, the screaming and the banging stops, but we still think we should wait. That's when we hear something from a different corner of our room. There is just enough light from a window in the back that hasn't been boarded up, and we see a figure get up off of the floor. This person has been in the room with us the entire 7 or 8 minutes we've been in there. They haven't let on until now. This person is in front of the only light source, so we just see a totally black figure. And it's now shuffling towards us without making a sound. It's exactly like a zombie movie, and we run. We don't bother to find out what this person's deal is and temporarily forget about the first, clearly dangerous guy. For an asthmatic, I hauled ass down the stairs and I never paused to catch my breath even once. As we are reaching the bottom of the stairwell, the screaming starts again. It's coming from the room next to us, but we don't stop running. The hole in the wall that we climb through to get into the building is yards away, and this man comes crashing out of the room behind us. We never look back, and we climb through the hole so fast I don't even remember doing it. Our two friends are waiting for us, and we throw ourselves into the car. They ask what happened because apparently that man was so loud that they could hear him screaming and breaking things from outside the building. They thought we were making all that noise and were going to give it a few minutes before calling us to remind us that the police were still patrolling the area for drunk and underage college students, and we should probably shut the fuck up. But we tell them what actually happened and then decide to carry on with our plans for the night, because a beer was totally necessary after that. I live in North Wales, UK. For anybody who has had the pleasure of visiting, it truly is a beautiful place to live. Though for an adolescent boy, it is certainly lacking in things to do. As a result, my friends and I would often find ourselves mindlessly exploring areas of countryside and coastline, quite sparsely populated in comparison to the closest cities. There was a dual carriageway, running right along the coast from Wales into England. Also, train tracks run alongside this road for most of its course, occasionally passing overhead via a small cement bridge. Anyway, there was one night a few years ago when about 4 of us randomly decided to try and explore the inside of one of these bridges, as one in the group had observed a manhole cover nearby, which we believed to be the entrance. On closer inspection, we discovered that several tools would be required in order to gain entry. We returned with the necessary equipment and proceeded to unbolt the cover. This had to be done stealthily as the train track was right beside us, not close enough to be of any danger, definitely a sufficiently small distance to cause panic for any train driver. And panic usually means police. It wasn't long before we had removed the heavy steel disc and had started descending the ladder down into the structure. Once we had all safely reached the bottom, we decided to progress to the other side. At this point, we are totally confined into the narrow space that leads into the main area. If you are confused as to what the hell this bridge is supposed to be, you probably should be, because it's rather peculiar. I mean, I would have never even known there was an inside had we not found that manhole. So as we squeeze and crouch, and at one point scrape along our bellies, to the other side of the structure, there is a growing sense of claustrophobia between us. The distance from end to the other is surprisingly long, but by the halfway point you can look down through narrow gaps onto the motorway below. This was actually pretty cool, which helped keep us calm in a strange way. At this point, apart from the mild discomfort and confinement, we were still just a group of guys on an adventure, but this was about to change dramatically. No more than a few meters beyond halfway, which we could tell due to the symmetry of the passageways through the bridge, one of us claimed that they could see some object in the distance at the far end. Slightly hesitantly, we agreed to investigate. Bad move. Because I reached the end first, and let me tell you, I have never felt the same sense of dread before or ever since. In front of me was a single fold-away chair positioned facing a wall. On the wall was a partially torn page from a newspaper or a magazine, showing a fully naked lady in an erotic position. The reason I don't refer to it as porn is because something was different about it. I can't put my finger on it, but it seemed more sinister than sexy, if that makes any sense. More disturbingly, the eyes of the woman on display had been cut from the page, removed with precision, not just hastily ripped off. The scene that lay before us had rendered us completely speechless, and an empowering sense of panic could be felt collectively. That was when we found the condom. The horrendous, gut-wrenching, blood-drenched condom. Needless to say, we got out of there as fast as humanly possible, smashing our knees and shins against the sharp cement edges that lined the path to the ladder by which we had entered. Of course, we were all praying to God that the manhole hadn't been resealed, as it was impossible to tell until you reached the ladder itself. Thankfully, the exit route was clear, and we promptly dashed as far as our legs could carry us. I'm sure this ending comes as a disappointment to some of you hearing this, as we luckily never bumped into the twisted individual who sits in that chair, but I must stress how radically out of the norm this was given where I live. The reason I mentioned the population earlier was with purpose. There is easily enough people here to escape the realms of crazy country folk, yet nowhere near enough people to have someone clearly lose grip on society without somebody taking notice. For example, there was literally only one homeless man who everyone in the area knew and grew fond of, eventually resulting in a mass gathering at his funeral when he passed away. I sometimes think, though not recently as I had more or less forgotten about that night entirely, about the person who climbs down into that bridge and navigates through the darkness to sit there facing a wall and do God knows what, that ends up with a condom full of blood. You honestly couldn't envision a more surreal situation. It has just come to my realization that what we unearthed that night has not once been uttered to another soul. As a naive teenager, it was a type of thing you just wanted to forget about. But thinking about it, we probably should have let the police know, or at least someone know about what was down there, because it wasn't the doings of a healthy-minded individual. One of my favorite activities is exploring old abandoned buildings. I've seen quite a few strange things during these trips, but one experience still creeps me out to this day. A few years ago, I found a long-forgotten water refinery through the help of online exploration communities and Google Earth. Although it's stupid, I always go to places for the first time alone. Partly for the thrill and partly because if something bad were to happen, I would feel terrible having brought someone else into that situation. So I make plans to head there the next day after my classes let out. The day of the trip, I pack up my camera and water bottle and set off following my hand-drawn map. After an hour or two of biking, I finally arrive at the place, which luckily had an old bike path dead-ending just past it. It was completely overtaken by vegetation, with trees growing up, through and around the buildings. Not to mention that the actual buildings were just disintegrating, with paint peeling off every wall and ceiling. I took my time scouring each of the buildings, looking around for anything interesting. I found hundreds of broken windows, weird broken spheres, and some kind of giant oven. After an hour or two of successful exploring, I decided to head off happy with an SD card full of pictures. Soon after I pulled my bike back through the hole in the fence, I entered, and I started biking away. I remember there was one last shot I wanted to get. I'm pretty insistent on getting the shots I want, and I didn't know if I would ever come back, so I decided to just tough it out, ride back, and take the picture. As I was going back, I saw a lone man dressed in old clothes, walking down the bike trail away from the dead end. I thought it was kind of a strange path for someone to take a walk on, and something in me said, "Don't let him see you go in there." I biked past him and I gave him a slight head nod and figured I'd bike all the way to the end of the trail, turn around, and by the time I got back, he'd be long gone. Having continued in the opposite direction, I leisurely take my time to the end and turn around, and as I head back toward the hole in the fence, I see him there, staring at me, and walking back toward the dead end from which he came. He had a happy look on his face, but it wasn't the kind of happiness that made me feel at ease in any way. The best way I could describe it is, he looked like he had just been told a very dirty joke and was trying to contain it. I knew I had to do something, as I was literally trapped between him and a dead end. I decided to play it cool once more, but be ready to drop everything and run if things got hairy. As I get closer and closer to him, I can see his facial expression clearer, and it's not someone I want to be in the same state with, let alone the same bike path. I'm silently cursing myself for going back for one picture. Finally, I'm about 20 feet away from him, and he calls out, "I sure would like a ride. It's so hot out. Mind if I jump on?" As soon as I hear this, I realize this is no longer my brain falsely interpreting something as creepy. I pick up speed and rush past him, putting as much space between us as I can. I now look behind me, and I see that he's once again turned around and following me. At this point, I bolt, sprinting down the bike path back onto the road. Interestingly, I stop at a nearby gas station on the way home to get a refill on my Gatorade. I see a cop there and told him I just rode down the old bike path by this park. He looked at me, sort of bewildered as to why a person would ride out there, or at least that's what I guessed from behind his sunglasses. And he told me he didn't recommend people going there, especially alone, as some shady characters like to hang out there. I wish I could say I stayed away, but I went back one other time with a girl and had a completely different, but almost as creepy experience. It's shorter and not really worth it, but I can add it into the comments if anyone wants to hear it. I live in a rural area in the north of the UK. About 20 minutes outside of the village I live in is a large complex of abandoned buildings. I haven't ever been able to get a straight answer on what these used to be. Some say an old farm, others say it was an RAF, UK Air Force base. Either way, it is a cool place to explore, and any kid's dream. I'm older now, 18 male, but I practically grew up here, spending many summers at this place with my group of mates. We're all older now, so we don't go anymore. I mentioned how many times I've been to demonstrate how comfortable I feel with this place. Any creepy feelings usually associated with abandoned buildings have worn off because of how many times I have been here. I should also mention that in all my time visiting this place with my friends, we have never seen anyone else there. It was kind of like our place. Tonight I was chilling with a mate at my house, and we are both going separate universities in a few weeks, so we were feeling quite reflective and started talking about our childhoods and, in particular, our many trips to these abandoned buildings. Eventually, although it was late, curiosity got the better of us, and we decided to hop in his car and drive the short journey to this place. When we got there, it was pitch black and we had absolutely no gear except the torches on our phones. He had even come straight from work, so he was in his formal suit. We arrived at the place and began walking around, looking at all the buildings and recounting stories of all the summers we had spent there. We were talking carelessly and loudly. In hindsight, this was probably a mistake. We were quite deep in the complex when it started, and loud tapping, the sound of metal on metal, it startled us and we both jumped. In an effort to calm ourselves down, we told each other it was probably the wind. It didn't take us long to work out that this couldn't be the case. The tapping has a rhythm to it, but it was one that would keep on changing. A few times it would even have a recognizable tune, such as Queen, We Will Rock You. At this point, me and my mate were terrified. We started to slowly, as quietly as possible, go back the way we had come, and towards where his car was parked. We had only made it a few meters when I accidentally stepped on a bit of MDF board lying on the floor. It snapped with what felt like the loudest sound in the world. At that point, the tapping abruptly stopped and everything went silent. We started to creep away again. We had only made it a bit further when something I will never forget, but I wish I could, happened. We heard a voice. It sounded mad, but it was loud and clear enough to hear. A man's voice, and it was speaking English, but what it was saying didn't make any sense. Just a random jumble of words and phrases blurted out without any pause. At this point, we both broke. We sprinted towards the way out, suppressing the urge to scream like kids. As we were running to the entrance, we ran past another building. As we ran past, quite loudly this time, we heard another voice. It was a man's voice again, but definitely different from the first one. This was saying a similar assortment of nothing, but we didn't stop to listen. We sprinted full tilt till we got to his car, hurled ourselves in and screeched off. We got back to mine and practically hugged each other for the rest of the night. It might not sound that creepy now, but something about those voices coming from abandoned buildings put fear in the animal part of my brain. This story takes place in August of 2013 in the mountains of southern Oregon. I am a USAF Security Forces Airman, military policeman. My girlfriend was at work, and as a swelteringly hot day began to turn into thunderstorms, my buddy Nick, another military cop, and I decided to go explore some back roads and get out of the heat in town. Southern Oregon is crisscrossed with logging roads, some actively used and many totally forgotten and grown over. Nick and I spent many of our days off starting on roads that we knew, finding roads we didn't know, and driving for hours into the mountains, eventually navigating back to the paved roads. On this particular day, with storm clouds building over the mountains, we set off on a road we had never been on, and began the drive into the mountains. After driving for around an hour, we hadn't seen nor heard any signs of other people in the woods. We rounded a bend in the thick fir woods, and emerged in a meadow that was totally surrounded by thick aspen groves. The meadow was perfectly flat and eerily still. We both noticed a strange stillness almost immediately. No birds, hardly any insect noise, no squirrels, and certainly no other people. On the far side of the meadow, right at the edge of the tree line, there was a picnic table. The table was very odd, however. It was painted a bright orange and was much larger than a typical picnic table in a park. Remarking on this, Nick drove through the meadow to get a closer look. I remember being apprehensive as we approached. The whole scenario was exceptionally strange. The overall silence of the aspen grove was unsettling. Also, it was nearly impossible to see far into the trees, as aspens grow extremely close together. When we parked by the table, I hopped out of the passenger seat of the truck to check it out. I'm not very tall, only 5'5". Regardless, the table was ridiculously oversized and practically unusable. The seats were nearly at chest level, meaning I would have to climb up to even sit on them. As I was looking at the table, Nick called me over to the truck, and I noticed he was looking back into the aspens. At first, I couldn't see what he was looking at, but then I noticed a splash of color that was completely out of place in the thick trees. A small one-man tent was set back in the trees, about 50 feet from the strange table. I had an initial feeling of dread, and I felt certain that there was someone in the tent, and if we could see the tent, they could see us. There were no campgrounds in this area, no people, no main roads for miles. Surely someone camping so remotely would be, at the very least, a strange person. However, as we observed the tent, we didn't see any movement or hear any sounds coming from it. Nick suggested I call out. I didn't want to, but I did. "Hey, anyone in there?" I yelled. No reply. Feeling completely on edge now, Nick and I thought about driving away and leaving this strange area, but we began to fear the worst. What if there was a body in the tent? What if somebody had been kidnapped? After some debate, we decided to have Nick turn the truck around to drive away from the camp. Should we need to leave in a hurry, he would be waiting behind the wheel. With my heart pounding, I started walking through the trees towards the tent. I was totally keyed up with my senses on full alert. When I reached the campsite, several things struck me as odd. Backpacks were scattered all over. No fire had been built. No wood collected. The tent was literally full of backpacks and women's clothing. Full of dread, I turned to leave and tell Nick what I had seen. As I left, I heard Nick start yelling. "Let's go, let's get the fuck out of here." Not knowing why he was yelling, I ran back to the truck. When I broke out of the trees, I saw a beat-up old Ford Taurus on the road, blocking us from leaving the meadow. I immediately leapt in the passenger seat and Nick floored the gas pedal. The car was occupied by 2 men. A third person was laying against the window in the back. As we drove across the meadow, the driver attempted to block us from the road, but Nick drove around them and accelerated the way we had come from. I looked back and saw the car attempting to turn around on the narrow road. And Nick drove like a madman. And though I was honestly terrified that they would catch up, we hit the highway without seeing the car again. I still do not know if the person in the back was male or female. I called the state police and they promised to send a trooper out to check the scene. However, I received a call the next day from a trooper stating that the campsite, the backpacks, and the women's clothing was all gone. Though he could tell that people had been in the area, the strange table was still by the thick aspen grove. I have not returned to the area, and I do not plan to. In 2011, I was a sophomore in high school and I was hanging out with my friend Hadley. We live in the Rust Belt and the population of our area has declined a lot in the last 50 years. So schools were emerged as a result of declining enrollment, which means there are a lot of abandoned schools. I lived in a small town on the Ohio border, and the abandoned school was a hotspot for teenagers who wanted to smoke weed and break windows, and just overall cause havoc. My friend and I were in a breezeway type area. You could just step right in over a 1.5-foot wall, because all of the glass had been broken out. All of a sudden, a guy comes around the corner and grabs my friend, telling her to come with him. We think it's a guy who intends to call the cops, so we book it the fuck out of there, and walk to my cousin's house down the street. It is the day before my aunt's birthday. Also, it was a supermoon that day, March 19th, 2011. So all of my family is at my cousin's house, and we hang out with him for a bit. They all end up going out to eat, but my cousin Hadley and I stay back at the house. It's now dark outside, and we are sitting on my cousin's stoop and smoking cigarettes, when all of a sudden we see a man walking down my cousin's driveway, from the direction of her garage, not the direction of the street, and he has his coat pulled over his mouth, and his hat pulled down to his eyes. So only his eyes and nose are visible, and he's making a strange gesture at us. At first glance, I thought he was jangling keys at us. So my dumbass thinks it's our uncle trying to give us the house keys, and I walk up to him, and my cousin says, "Get the fuck away from him." And now I'm a little bit closer, and I can see what he's doing. Masturbating. We turn around, run around the house to the front door. The door to the stoop was literally never ever used, and was blocked with a bunch of shit, because it opened up to a storage room, and we thankfully get inside. The guy gets to the front door after us, and finishes all over the sliding glass door, and then runs back towards her garage into the woods. We are freaking out, so we call the cops. They ask us some questions and then leave. About a week later, a girl who had graduated from our high school heard about what happened, and remembers seeing a car parked on the street behind my cousin's garage, and had even taken down the license plate number. She reported the number to the police, and it's registered to an Ohio man. And then a few weeks later, this same car chases a woman home from Walmart in Youngstown and attempts to follow her inside and assault her. He was finally arrested. It turns out he had a habit of trying to sexually assault people in Walmart parking lots in both Newcastle, Pennsylvania and Youngstown, Ohio. He faced charges in both states, and my cousin, friend, and I were all told to testify against him. When we go to court, we see his mugshot, and the guy who had masturbated and chased us was the fucking guy who grabbed my friend in the abandoned school. He wasn't gonna call the cops. He was gonna try to assault her. He got a few years in prison, but I believe he got out in 2015 or 2016.